Okay, thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples on all of the lands that we're on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and can each in our own way try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So today we're going to talk about rural broadband and Rock Network's approach to solving the digital divide that exists in rural Canada. We're going to talk about a couple of approaches, one tied to fiber-based networks, some of which we're looking to deploy in Ontario, and also to look at satellite-dependent communities and how some next-generation satellite technologies can assist those communities in moving forward. So we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of broadband. Some of this will be, well, probably all of it will be obvious to everybody. And then we'll talk about fiber internet, satellite, and then kind of wrap up around our solutions and open it up for Q&A. So in terms of the benefits of broadband, and COVID has certainly helped us understand this, it really cuts across all aspects of society. Over the last 4 days or 5 days, we've had outages due to power and internet in Ottawa, and the kids weren't able to, do schooling. They weren't able to access their school portals. So, obviously, education is a very important piece that is supported by a strong internet capability. But also, businesses rely on internet. The healthcare system, and as we move forward, trying to move towards virtual care type models, which started because of the pandemic, because we had no other choice, but will probably become a model of enabling, specialist care to remote areas over a virtual platform. And so broadband becomes a key enabler of delivering better services for healthcare at a lower price point. For people in Northern Ontario, a lot of communities are dependent on tourism. So if you're in a remote area and you have a lodge, as an example, you need some level of internet in order for point of sale or just to attract people who are bringing children. If you're at a campground or whatever, they need to have some level of Wi-Fi access, and they need to be connected to the World Wide Web. Agriculture increasingly is becoming a Internet of Things and technology-enabled enterprise. John Deere and companies in the tractor industry, rather than selling tractors, are now moving to selling the tractor as a service, including internet connectivity. And a lot of that connectivity is over a satellite-based network. And of course, as well, from a GDP perspective, there's accelerated growth that can be enabled, and we'll talk about that in a second. From an economic growth perspective, we know that having high-speed internet enables existing businesses to grow, but also allows new businesses to be set up in areas that maybe they wouldn't have normally been set up. And what we've learned from COVID is the place of work doesn't have to be a physical place anymore. You can be working anywhere. We have our team at Rock Networks. They are sitting in Toronto, we're in Ottawa, we're in Moncton, we're in Alberta, we're in Newfoundland, we're in Nova Scotia, right? So we have a virtual team with some brick and mortar type locations, but increasingly that virtual teamwork approach is going to be more dominant. And this allows places like Northern Ontario to basically, because of the great environment that you have in terms of good schools, basically lower cost of living in terms of housing prices and things like that versus the cities. People can move there as long as they have a good internet connection and work remotely. The World Bank did a study that a few years ago that for every 10% increase in broadband, there's a 1.2% economic growth or GDP driver in developed economies. So that applies to Canada. So, you know, a lot of rural Canada today is 60% doesn't have broadband, which we'll show shortly. So, you know, increase every 10% will be a GDP driver for your local community. From a healthcare perspective, telehealth benefits mobility, reduces the use of emergency rooms. Remote medical analysis will become commonplace, where the patient goes home with a terminal and connected devices. Let's say you're on dialysis, or and you need to provide that data to your doctor, or you have a heart condition. All those monitoring devices can now be digitally enabled and connected to the internet to basically stream that data. And then your doctor comes in when there's an exception case that requires attention. So this will become the norm as we move forward, and with an aging population and having remote care. From an education perspective, having a better education system ends up creating long-term benefits for us in terms of a stronger workforce. Science, technology, the STEM type benefits create more learning opportunities. So as we can bring these kind of capabilities to more and more rural Canadians, that creates more learning opportunities and more opportunities for them as they think about career choice moving forward. And that became evident within COVID, due to COVID-19. And so we want to ultimately create a stronger workforce and recognize the benefits of internet, a better internet in terms of improving education opportunities. So let's look at fiber-based internet solutions. So we go to market under something that we call community broadband networks. And basically community broadband networks have 5 main attributes. First, they're meant to be affordable and high quality. By affordable, we mean competitive rates in the local market and similar, though not necessarily the same, as rates paid in suburban and urban Canada. From a quality perspective, the goal is to have a solution that is much higher reliability and delivers a better uptime. So this is where solutions like fiber-based internet, which has, you know, almost other than if a fiber line is cut, you don't have any wind or weather effects, unlike, let's say, with wireless type technologies, you can deliver a higher quality, less error-prone experience for users. So we focus on that. The second thing is our networks are designed to be equitable. So we don't just serve 60% of the town and not worry about everybody else. Our goal is basically 100% coverage or opportunity to get coverage. And so our strategy there dovetails very well with the federal government's stated goal of every Canadian will have a 50 megabit download or 10 megabit upload connection by 2030. And from an Ontario perspective, the Ford government has set the target that 100% of Ontarians will have a 50-10 connection by 2025. The third area is municipal governance. And that doesn't mean that municipalities necessarily own the network, but we participate in building the network in conjunction with communities, and that the communities have a voice in terms of promoting the network, being part of the network, and helping roll out the network and creating local job opportunities. So we focus a lot. We have a project in Northern Ontario that some of you may have heard about, the Huron Shore and Manitoulin Island community-owned fiber infrastructure, or H&M Coffee. And so with that model, we're partnering with the H&M Coffee Corporation, which is a not-for-profit entity established to participate in this rural broadband build. The fourth area is we want to make our network future-proof. And by future-proof, we look at a couple of things. One is what is the longevity of the asset? Because if you're going to put in an asset, you want to make sure if the community is participating that that asset is treated more like a utility than something that needs to be replaced every 5 to 7 years, which is why we focus mostly on fiber technologies, because fiber technologies that we deploy are good for the next 30 to 50 years. So if you think about your home and your phone line, if you've lived in your home for 40 years or whatever, the chances are that copper piece of cable that connects the wire into your home for your phone service, you've probably never had to replace it. And so if you think about that piece of copper being replaced by a piece of fiber, you can think about the longevity of that kind of asset. So I like to tell people, I remember when I was a kid growing up in Newfoundland, and we got phone service in our hometown in Terrenceville, and that phone line is still there, 50 years later. So that's one aspect of future-proof. The second aspect of future-proof is the scalability and capacity that the network will have. So in our H&M Coffee project, for example, there's about 19,000 underserved homes. There's about 32,000 homes in total in the footprint, some of which are served. But our network has the capacity to grow in the next 30 years to up to 50,000 homes. So that's one aspect of growth. The other aspect is when you put that fiber connection in to a home, you can deliver a 100 megabit service, a 500 megabit service, or eventually even a 10 gigabit service. So the beauty of fiber from a future-proofing is you will never be able to exhaust the bandwidth that this network can deliver. The only thing that needs to be upgraded is the backbone connection into the World Wide Web. And so that's what we mean when we talk about future-proof. The fifth thing, and one thing that we feel is unique to our approach, is that we build our networks to be open access. And so if you think about a alternative approach, let's say a telco-driven approach, it's sort of like the Henry Ford philosophy. You can have it in any color as long as it's black, i.e., you only have one choice of provider. In our approach, we actually create a wholesale network or open access network, and we allow multiple internet service providers to run on the network. So in the H&M Coffee footprint, as an example, we're working with indigenous communities and partners to provide ISP services. We're working with national ISPs or internet service providers to provide a service. And we're also working with small local ISPs that they can provide a service on this open access network. Rock Networks as well can provide a service on the network, a retail service, but Rock's ISP will be the same as any other ISP on the network. So we try to bring this total approach to the market such that, back to the municipality piece, if an ISP in the local region or a new business, let's say you've got a young person who just returned from doing a Microsoft or Cisco certification at college, comes back to their hometown, they could start up an ISP and provide services to the local community. Everybody knows this person. That person starts to build their business. He gets 100 users, 200 users, maybe gets to 1,000 users. And as he starts to grow the business, or she starts to grow the business, they actually will need to hire people to scale up the business. So that's the extra economic benefit that you get from just having a service with a telco or a international company, where you sign up for the service and immediately all of the money leaves the community. So by having the money kind of recycle in the community, you get that extra spin up economic benefit. And that's what we want to have happen as we build these networks in rural Canada. Okay, so let's take a little look at satellite internet. So in satellite, I'm sure there's some communities on the call that are maybe satellite dependent. So we wanted to specifically address your concerns about the bandwidth available. And the reality is, fiber is not going to make it to your community in the next 2 years or 3 years, or maybe even 5 years or 10 years. So how do we look at increasing the bandwidth to your community such that you can have better internet service today? So I'm sure everybody's heard about Elon Musk and Starlink. So Starlink provides a direct-to-home type solution using something called low Earth orbit satellites, and we'll talk a little bit about those. And so we have a partnership with a company called OneWeb, which is owned by the UK government, and Bharti out of India, and a few other shareholders. But we are one of OneWeb's, well, we were their first distribution partner in Canada. So we want to talk about how the OneWeb solution could potentially help communities that are satellite dependent today. So our ROC OneWeb low Earth orbit value prop is we provide a turnkey solution. We train the local community. We provide the hardware, airtime, and all the support. These types of terminals can deliver a lot more bandwidth than you get, let's say, from your C-band satellite. If you're the satellite dependent community, you probably have Telesat's C-band solution. And so this solution can provide 195 megabit download and 32 megabit upload, or to round it off, think about 150 megabit download speeds and 30 megabit uploads. This is for, think of this as a link into the community, and you can have multiple sets of these. The other thing about low Earth orbit satellites is because they're closer to the Earth, the latency or round trip time from when you hit your screen and select a website to go to that website being presented to you is much quicker. And so latency is good that way. Plus, if you're on calls like we're on today, a Zoom call, then latency will improve the time lag between any communications. In terms of a total cost of ownership, you're able to offer solutions to your customers similar to, let's say, a TELUS MiFi or Bell cellular-based internet type solution. One of the unique things about the OneWeb solution is that it has what's called a polar orbit. And by doing a polar orbit, basically everything from the North Pole down to 50 degrees north is covered today by the OneWeb solution. Little bit of technology, but the Starlink solution utilizes an equatorial orbit, so it rotates around the center of the Earth. And so it today only goes up to about 51 or 52 degrees. So all of northern Canada and the very north part of Ontario cannot be covered by the Starlink solution today. The other thing that this allows is northern Canada can be the first markets in the world to deploy these types of higher bandwidth solutions for satellite. The other thing is that we're able to do by bringing this solution down into a community, think of it as a new pipe coming into your community. If your community already has a Wi-Fi based distribution network or a fixed wireless access based distribution network, you can leverage all of that infrastructure. So we were talking to one potential customer last week, and they are an ISP, and they provide the Wi-Fi service over a ubiquity-based network. So they're able to leverage all of that infrastructure that they have already built. And then we recognize Canada's a cold place. So, you know, in terms of operation, we have heaters that can be added to the terminals for, 40 below or lower type operation. And these terminals are very cost effective in terms of the power consumption, because because they're closer to the actual satellite, they don't need the same amount of power to generate higher bandwidth. So a little bit on the low Earth orbit solution from OneWeb. So OneWeb is about 1,200 kilometers. Their terminals, their satellites are about 1,200 kilometers above the Earth. If you think about a medium Earth orbit, that's around 7,000 kilometers, and a geostationary orbit, that's around 25,000 kilometers above the Earth. And so as you get further away, obviously the round trip time, things travel through space at the same rate, the round trip time takes a lot longer. So if you're a satellite dependent community, you know that with your current geostationary based satellite, you have these issues of latency. So OneWeb is building a network of 650 satellites to span the entire Earth. They're at about 480 of those satellites deployed now, but because of the polar orbit, Canada is already covered. So it's premium spectrum. They've got all their spectrum rights. They've got all their landing rights in Canada. We're actually doing trials right now of the system with some customers. And so in terms of the technology and solution, it really comes down to higher bandwidth. You get better connectivity in terms of availability because there's many more satellites. And so if you're behind a mountain or you're around a turn, you can still have satellites that ultimately come into view, which that might not work if you are using a geostationary solution. And then the latency ensures the best speed of connection and the best prioritization of your traffic and connectivity to the network. So here's a deployment model example of the OneWeb solution. So let's say you have an existing network, as an example, C-band, which is quite common for satellite-dependent communities in Canada utilizing the Telesat network. Typically, a community would have one of these satellite terminals, and it might even actually be shared across multiple communities. So for example, one of the customers that we're working with supports 13 communities, and they have 2 terminals that support those communities. So they have about 240 megabits of total download speed that they can deploy across 13 communities. We're able to give them 200 plus megabits per community. So obviously a lot more bandwidth capable. So we can plug into the existing access network, whether it be fiber. Generally, it's not fiber in these remote communities. It is a wireless-based solution, either fixed wireless or even DSL or a Wi-Fi based solution. And that plugs into the OneWeb network, and we basically take it through to the World Wide Web. We have 2 points of presence in Canada that we can connect into. One is in Calgary, and the second is in Toronto. So for anybody in Ontario, we would basically look to connect into our Toronto interconnect site in downtown Toronto. And we partner with OneWeb and Zayo Communications for that connectivity option. So the advantage of this solution is that it's plug and play into your existing network. You can keep your C-band and then add more capacity, or if you have, in the case of some customers, their C-band contract is coming up for renewal with ISED or the CRTC. Many of these communities are subsidized in terms of their internet connectivity. You can basically choose to switch to the OneWeb solution, which, as we'll show you shortly, has a value proposition that is better than the C-band type solution. So let's look at the value proposition. So we have multiple types of offerings available, different speeds and feeds, if you will. And basically, the value that we want to create is that you will be able to offer a 50/10 user experience to your community. So if you look at a Telesat C-band utilizing, this 120 megabits per terminal, you get about 100 terabytes of total information that you can download per month at a pretty high price point to other types of services. If you look at our classic 75 megabit and download and 15 megabit upload, it provides about twice the amount of bandwidth at a lower price point. And the classic dual will provide even more bandwidth at a similar price point, just slightly higher. OneWeb also has the option of enabling a dedicated service. And the difference between dedicated and classic type services is dedicated, you will get 50/10 all the time, or dedicated mix, you get 75 megabits for certain communities and 100 megabits for other communities, and that will be available all the time. And the way to think about it in terms of the total number of users that you could support in a community and the bandwidth that you can guarantee every user, think of the classic 75/15 as you got 1,000 homes, every home is going to get a minimum of 200 gigabits per month. or you can have 2,000 homes and everybody can have 100 gigabits per month service. That doesn't mean that you have to limit everybody at 100 gigabits or 200 gigabits. It just means that would be the maximum if everybody was at that number, because you have 200 terabits, 1,000 users times 200 gigabits equals 200 terabits of information. If you think about the dedicated mix, the upper end of the quadrant, a mix of 75 megabit download and 100 megabit download, you could get 3,000 users basically at 200 gigabits per month of total bandwidth. So for the first time, we enable a solution in Northern Canada that either is based on a C-band solution or looking at a geo ExploreNet type experience. And for those who are on the call that maybe have an ExploreNet connection, over time that connection has gotten worse from a user experience perspective. So this enables us to deliver a service that will meet the federal government guidelines of 50 megabit download and 10 megabit upload. So that's our goal from a user experience perspective. So a little bit on our solution. So a little bit about Rock Networks. We build, operate, and own broadband networks. We partner a lot with local communities and with government organizations. So for our project in Northern Ontario, the Coffee Project, we partner with the federal government, the Ontario government, Canada Infrastructure Bank, and third-party debt and equity providers to bring a total solution to the market. And then we partner with other municipalities across Canada. We have Indigenous partnerships that help us bring a solution to market for government accounts that have a provisional set aside for Aboriginal business. We're able to partner with Aboriginal companies and support those companies in growing their business. So we think that's an important part of the broader strategy for Rock Networks. And we've been rewarded over the last couple of years with a few growth-oriented awards. And so that reflects, basically our customers' endorsement of our solution. The challenge that we're looking to address in terms of broadband is the rural versus large population center divide. And this comes from the CRTC Communications Marketing Report that was published last year, and it's based on 2019 stats. But basically, if you're in rural Canada, there's a 60% chance you will not get 100 megabit or better connection. And if you're in urban Canada, there's a 100% chance you have that service. So that's the divide, right? It's a 40% have and 60% have nots. And so that's what we're trying to work on in terms of addressing the gap in broadband. Here's a project for our project in Northern Ontario. This is the catchment area that we're looking at for our H&M Coffee project. So the project starts at Sault Ste. Marie. We actually connect in through a partner into the US in through Detroit for that side of the network in terms of internet. And we go all the way through to Sudbury. And then we connect into the Toronto Internet Exchanges. So this is basically the route that we have, and then we connect down into Toronto over the Zayo dark fiber network. The other thing that we look at is if we look at partners like Zayo, there's a lot of other communities that we can leverage the footprint that Zayo has in place to build fiber connectivity in their communities. And the Ontario government has done the accelerated high-speed internet program reverse auction. Even with the reverse auction, there still will be areas left unserved. And so if there's opportunity for us to partner with communities that are still underserved on the Zayo dark fiber footprint, within a 10-kilometer radius on either side of their dark fiber, there's about 500,000 homes and businesses in Ontario. So the way we look at the solution, we're not wedded to a particular technology. As you've seen, we can deploy fiber, we can deploy satellite. So in terms of network types, it's fiber to the home, it can be fixed wireless access. TV white space is a new technology in the lower frequency bands as the market moved from analog to digital TV. That 600 megahertz spectrum started to free up. And so there's technologies now available that even in significantly wooded areas or treed areas, you can get a pretty good user experience in around a 50-10 type solution. From a satellite perspective, we talked about OneWeb from a low Earth orbit perspective, but we also have other partnerships for medium Earth orbit, for high capacity solutions, and geo orbit for even higher bandwidth solutions for communities and for businesses. The geo market is going through a next generation technology utilizing what's called HTS, or high throughput satellites. And so we'll start to see new satellites come online that will have much more bandwidth capabilities than the old geo orbit solutions had, like let's say from Telesat with a C-band, or the solution from ExploreNet. The other thing that we provide is solutions for wireless communications, like two-way radios. So if you're in a community and you have public works, your fire department, people within your community that need access to two-way radio solutions, Rock Networks designs, builds, and supports two-way radio networks in every province and territory in Canada. We provide rugged type devices. Obviously, two-way radios are rugged, but other ruggedized mobility type devices. And we also are working with partners for next generation 911. There is a requirement from the federal government that all the public safety answering points in Canada, there's about 300 of them, have to upgrade to NG 911 by the end of 2024. So we see that as an emerging market solution. And certainly if you have a requirement, we'd love to talk to you in detail about it. And from a network perspective, if a community is interested in owning their own network, we can design it, we can build it for you, and we can even operate it for you. Or if you're just interested in a partnership, we can design, build, operate, and co-own. There's multiple business model solutions that we can enable. And then from a consumer services perspective, as we build these networks, it's not just about internet, but we're looking to provide voice over IP and TV type services. And we're also a Bell Mobility reseller from our site in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. And so if there's a requirement for mobility type solutions, we can also provide that. Our goal as we deploy these solutions is, where possible and economically feasible, which grant money helps in making that so, we want to deploy the fastest speeds that we can. Our target is a gigabit for homes, 10 gigabit for business and municipalities, university, schools, and hospitals, or the MUSH sector as it's called. We focus around having a quick setup. So as the network is being built, we want to make sure that people come online very quickly. And as we talked about, or as I talked about, the business model can be tuned to your unique rural community. In terms of differentiators, we go to market with best-in-class technology partners like Nokia, Zayo, which I've already mentioned. Corning is the largest provider of fiber-based connectivity solutions in the world. So where possible, we work with Corning. There's supply chain challenges in the fiber industry, so we have to be flexible to address those supply chain challenges, which we do. And we also partner with companies like West Tower, which is the largest tower construction company in Canada, but over the last 2 years has also moved into fiber to the home type builds and is buying companies to scale up their operations in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Quebec. In terms of risk mitigation, it's not all on the community as we deliver these networks. So we want to make sure that we mitigate any financial risk if the community has a desire to own, or we de-risk the community entirely and fund the network up to 100%. And our solution is a complete turnkey solution. With that, I'll open the floor up to any questions.
All right, so if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put it, raise your hand or put it in the chat box. So we have Erwin first.
Yes, thank you. It's Erwin Butekoffer from Nebing Municipality, just south of Thunder Bay. First question I have is with regards to the business case service parameters that you have to serve a community. I mean, we're one of the largest municipalities in the province, but with a very small population. And so we are also serviced by two providers. We have Thunder Bay Telephone and T-Bay Tel. We're working with T-Bay Tel through a number of other communities for the funding in the internet, or correction, the fiber into our communities. But we're also described as one of the most expensive in the country to provide that service to. We know that when we had discussions with the phone companies before, they said they needed 5 customers per kilometer. So obviously you're going to need numbers in our, so what would you say to us if we came and talked to you about providing a service for our municipality? Like, would you say those numbers to us, say, we can't work with you?
We have, so that's a great question. So when I talk to US-based investors, private equity firms, they always say, what's your cost per home passed? And I said, well, it depends on where you go. I said, it comes down to cost, number of homes per route kilometer, right? And when I talk to Americans, I use route mile. But you're talking about 5 homes per route kilometer. That's at the lower end of viability, and only economically viable with grant money. So if you're already working to have a provider put fiber into your community, there is no business case for anybody else to come in and invest 100-cent dollars to add fiber. Okay, this is why we focus on open access networks. We don't want you to be left with only one provider, which, you know, the incumbent telcos will typically, you know, put the infrastructure in and they're the only provider over that infrastructure. We don't believe in that model. We believe that a fiber should be put in so every home can be served, but that fiber should be open to all. And that's what we mean by open access network. So our approach is different. If you're already far down the path and they've already started deployment, there's no business case for somebody else to come in because there's just not enough homes, not enough population, right? So, but the open access model is really what we believe is the right approach moving forward. But feel free to follow up. I think Andrea will provide my email address to everybody, and I can have a more detailed, wholesome conversation with you offline, Erwin, to understand the specific aspects of your communities and that. And for communities that are maybe not going to get fiber in the next little bit, but you have some fixed wireless in your community and just want a higher bandwidth, then the OneWeb solution could offer some increased bandwidth for your community from a satellite perspective.
Okay, so one quick question. Are you cut off from government funding?
No, in the H&M Coffee project, we've got funding from the Ontario government, from the federal government, and we're getting Canada Infrastructure Bank loans. So the way the CIB model works is their loans are 20-year term. They're designed to de-risk projects, so they're at very low interest rate. When I say very low, I mean like 1% interest type rates. But CIB's mandate does not allow them to invest with communities. Their mandate is to invest with private entities like Rock Networks or private equity partners to build the networks to de-risk the public infrastructure being built. Now, that doesn't mean that a community can participate in the funding. Let's say it's $99 to build the network. The community could put in 33, CIB could put in 33, and Rock Networks and its partners could put in 33. And so CIB will match the private equity piece or the third-party financing in the market, but it can't be a 50-50 split between CIB and the community. That's not the way their mandate works. So there's multiple funding options, and that's where you can get creative. We have submitted applications to other areas under the Universal Broadband Fund. There's been thousands of applications that have been submitted across Canada. So the UBF under ISED is still working through those applications. And we hope to be successful on some other projects as well.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Do we have any other questions? I don't see any in the chat box. I do have one question for you, Joe. How do I determine if fiber or satellite is best for my community?
So we would work with you to understand where your community is. So if you're in a very remote area that there's no backbone fiber or access to any fiber within hundreds of kilometers. So one example is in Ontario is the Matawa First Nations. So they've gotten some grants under the Universal Broadband Fund as well as the Ontario ICON program. And that basically is starting at Geraldton and building a fiber network 895 kilometers to the north to Webequie. And so that obviously is a very costly network to serve a very few number of homes, but without that connectivity, these communities actually have no internet. And as well, it's not lost on government officials that this area is also the Ring of Fire, which is obviously a big potential mining opportunity for Ontario and those First Nation communities moving forward. So that's one example of where fiber has been put in with a significant cost, but it has that advantage of having an economic engine that would be required moving forward. And they're actually even looking at putting a road network up there now. I would say from fiber to satellite, if your community is currently a satellite dependent community, and there's about, I think, 40 or 50 of those across Ontario, I could be wrong in that number. If you're already an existing satellite dependent community, the OneWeb solution can provide you 2 to 3 times the bandwidth at a equivalent or lower cost than you're paying today. And that would be something that I would look at if I was in those communities right away.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe.